All right, last team to talk about, the New England Patriots. And obviously, not just a new head coach, Jerod Mayo, the anointed one, the guy, the succession plan, the guy whose pathway to this gig was apparently codified, written in contract for when they did eventually move on from Bill Belichick. Jerod Mayo and also a new quarterback, whether it's Jacoby Brissett taking over again as an interim thing or whether they do give the job to Drake May right out of the gate. A lot of change in New England for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, you would think with kind of an incumbent going in there and replacing Belichick and you lose Steve Belichick too, who's now at the college ranks, you would think this would be an easy situation to read. And yet it feels like it isn't, right? Like we obviously haven't seen Mayo as a head coach. We don't know how they're going to handle the quarterback situation and development of Drake May. And there's a lot of mystery with the weapons. Who's going to start on the outside? Is it the two rookies? Is it still Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas? And even their defense. Honestly, Belichick may be the greatest defensive game planner of all time. What sort of X factor does that play? Even though they do have a talented defense, there's talent at all three levels of their defense, right? Barmore and good pair of linebackers, and Christian Gonzalez on the outside was looking like a star before he got hurt last year. But how it's the Belichick effect, right? It's kind of the opposite of getting a Jim Harbaugh or somebody in, is a Bill Belichick leaving. How much does that affect our game planning? How much does that affect our preparation and just everything that we used to do? And I'm not at all questioning Jerod Mayo's capabilities of doing that, but capability and execution are two different things, right? And you're still talking about a guy, even though he's been in the building, who's a rookie head coach. So there, to me, is as much unknown about New England as there is about any team in football. But The season is about how in the world they handle and develop Drake May. I think you mentioned it right at the top. Do you start him from day one? I would honestly, I would do it. I'm not as huge a fan as like this 6 to 7 game bridge quarterback thing as everybody else. I would just let him take the lumps and let him get the chemistry with guys in game action. I know it's a really tough division. They have a really tough schedule, but let him play. I mean, you drafted him 3rd overall for a reason. I'm in that boat. Drake May was spectacular. The last 2 years in college, he led the nation in passing grade and big-time throws. And he gives you this vertical element that New England just didn't have with Mac Jones, right? And they even drafted 2 really good vertical receivers with Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, 2 of the better vertical receivers in the country over the last couple of years. You've built this thing for Drake May. I would just let him go ahead and let it rip and make the mistakes early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much. I have concerns about the Patriots this year. I know everyone's sort of focusing on that offensive side and saying, all right, you got the quarterback, you stayed at 3, you drafted him, but look at what's around him, whether it's the offensive line, whether it's his receiving core, even with the rookies that you're bringing in. It just doesn't look like a good situation. I might have as many questions about the defensive side as well because you just removed the Belichicks from it, right? The highest ranking Belichicks, the ones that move the needle, theoretically, they're all gone. So we know the impact. I mean, even if you say, okay, GM Bill Belichick lost his way, even head coach Bill Belichick lost his way, the one thing that never changed was defensive coach, whether it's Bill Belichick or the Steve Belichick, the defense never lost its teeth schematically. Like, that was always able to move the needle and was always good at putting players in a position to succeed. Now that's all gone. So 20 plus years of taking these guys that were not necessarily one-dimensional, but not necessarily complete defenders, putting them in a defense, understanding what you can ask of them and what you can't, and protecting them because of that, may all have gone out of the window. And okay, Jerod Mayo, came through that system, like he's seen it operate firsthand, but we simply don't know if all of that is still going to be a thing for the Patriots, or if all of that's now off the table, and this is just a regular defense. If it is, I think everything we know about the personnel on that defense changes, right? Like, everybody we think we know, all bets are off because they're completely different. Like, we've seen Jabril Peppers look horrendous in different defenses. And then he kind of resuscitates his career in New England. He starts looking like the new version of Patrick Chung. And you're like, oh, wow, Pepper, like it's all come together. He might go back to being like the old Jabril Peppers without a Belichick defense. So, ultimately, they won, 4 games last year. I don't know that they're going to win any more than that this year, even with potentially a new quarterback. There's just so much unknown about this team now.
Yeah, I agree. And even in a broader sense than just the defense, Bill Belichick, the one thing he was better at than everybody else was just game management in general, whether it be offense or defense or just feeling out the pace of a game, right? Like we used to see him win shootouts or, I've seen him win games. I think a couple years ago they beat the Jets in a game 6-0 where just neither team could score and they won on a punt return and they basically just said, let the Jets beat themselves. Like there are times when game management is the most premium thing in the NFL, right? We see it. Bill Belichick and Andy Reid really has won the last 2 Super Bowls because obviously he had Mahomes, but because he managed the game right? Or like the great coaches just do that. And you see some of the not great coaches falter, not because they're terrible coaches, but because they can't manage games. And Belichick is arguably the best all time at that. We saw it all those years, a combination of him and Tom Brady. But going from the greatest game manager also of all time to a rookie head coach, no matter who it is going to be a detriment moving forward to your team. So it's really going to be this year. The concerns are right to be had because they're in a wicked tough division where any of the other 3 teams could win it. And they're all really talented. They play a wicked hard schedule otherwise. And they just you just don't know where this thing is going. To me, especially offensively, they're so young offensively everywhere, basically everywhere, except maybe at right tackle with Owenu and at tight end with Hunter Henry. They've got young kids all over the place, and it's going to take time, whether it's May or Brissett from the start or however they handle that part. It's still going to take a lot of time to compete in this division with so much just the youth on this football team on the field and on the sidelines.
The other thing I think that Belichick brought, so we've got the overarching ability of sort of taking potentially flawed players and minimizing those flaws, maximizing the strengths. We've got the in-game stuff you were talking about, one of the best in-game managers of all time. And then you have the third element, which is Belichick has always been outstanding at weekly game-to-game planning, right? The defense will look better, or look different versus one opponent than it will versus the next opponent, right? And that ability to change up week to week also potentially has gone out of the door now. So, it may have been the right decision to say, okay, the Belichick time, it's come to an end. It's time to mutually part ways to have this divorce. But, he is arguably the greatest head coach of all time for a reason, and the reason isn't just Tom Brady. And I think we are potentially overlooking the number of ways that can have an impact on this team in 2024 and beyond. So, there's a lot of talent questions on this team. They're 28th in the offensive line rankings heading into the year. That receiving core kind of looks a lot like Carolina's from last year, which is concerning. Okay, they've got multiple rookies as opposed to just Jonathan Mingo last year for the Panthers, but you could easily imagine that receiving core being a major problem again. The defense, as we said, is question marks all over the place, and we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be yet, whether it's going to be Brissett as a bridge, whether he's going to play the whole year as a bridge, or whether Drake May gets thrown in sooner rather than later. So, maybe this regime will work its way to a good place, but I imagine year one being a pretty ugly season for the Patriots. And honestly, this is a team that could be on its way to the number 1 overall pick next year.
Yeah, I agree. And I think then the good thing about that is if they are that bad this year and it's that much of a rebuilding year still, they don't have to take a quarterback, right? You could sit there and take a left tackle. You could take the best defense. You could just take the best player in the draft because next year, quarterback won't be the best football player in the draft. Not like it was this past year, right? Where the first 3 and 6 of the first 12 went. That's not going to be the case next year. It's not as quarterback heavy. You can go the best defensive player. You could take a franchise left tackle. You could take a number 1 receiver. And that's what this is about, right? You mentioned the split between how it affects them in 2024 and beyond. And I think the and beyond part of that is the big focus here, both with how they're handling Drake May, if Brissett's going to start early, with the development of the weapons, with the direction the defense is going, every bit of that. Like, if you're judging the Patriots as a team just in 2024, even if they get the number 1 overall pick, it's really not the worst outcome, right? Like, I don't think they're actually, it sounds funny, but nobody's expecting anything of them. They're trying to develop a quarterback. There really isn't a worst outcome for this team because even if they have the worst record in the league, then they're going to come out with either the best player in the draft or a franchise left tackle or something that really, really helps them with that and beyond part. So I don't think there's any bad outcomes. It's just going to hurt for a little bit, right? Or around New England and around Boston, where you go, oh, okay, this is what it's like without Belichick, and this is what it's like to rebuild for the first time in 30 years.